How are we all today? This is AutoCAD Plotting from A to Z. So just a brief little summary of the class, designed to give an overview of the AutoCAD plotting process. So we'll really go through AutoCAD plotting from start to finish. The class is designed as sort of a beginner's level, so it's meant for somebody that maybe hasn't ever plotted before to really see some of the basics and understand how to set up your plots and some of the options that can be used when you're plotting. Some of the learning objectives we'll go over. At the end of the class, you'll be able to understand all the options in the plot dialog box and also in the plot and publish tab in options. Understand the use of PC3 STB CTB files and when to use them and if you should use them. We'll troubleshoot some common problems that you may have with plotting, also go over some tips and some common things that we see and support from customers that we see the most often. A brief overview of AutoCAD for Mac. Do we have any AutoCAD for Mac users in the room? Okay, a couple. So the AutoCAD for Mac section, I did have to cut that down just as sort of a disclaimer at the beginning. So I am going to briefly go over that, but it's going to be a shorter section. So just keep aware, if you were here specifically for Mac, that's going to be a shorter section today. And then hopefully we'll leave some time for Q&A to discuss any plotting questions you may have that we didn't hit on. So we do want to give you guys the option that if this isn't the right class for you based on that to go and see another one. I do have your name and address, though, so keep that in mind. But no, AU is obviously for you guys. You spend a lot of money to come here and come to Vegas, and so we really want to make sure that the sessions are right for you. I know even myself, I had a lot of trouble deciding which classes. There were a lot of times when there were multiple classes I wanted to attend. So if there's another session that you might think might be better based on that, that's okay. Just a little bit about me before we get started. I worked as a CAD manager in the industry for 12 years. 7 years at an architectural firm and 5 years at an MEP firm. I joined Autodesk in September of 2008 on the support team, supporting the AutoCAD core products. So that's AutoCAD, AutoCAD Lite, Design Review, TrueView, Impression, and a few others. And then I've been the Americas region AutoCAD team lead since 2010. So the team lead for the group that supports those core AutoCAD products. We have 7 of us all around the country that support AutoCAD. 19 years experience with AutoCAD. And I know you're thinking I don't look old enough, but I assure you I am. Just a few little personal things. I do love traveling, so if you have any places off the beaten path that you've visited, I'd love to hear them afterwards. Always looking for a new place that's sort of not touristy. And I've been married for 3 months, which nothing better for a new marriage than to come to Vegas by yourself 3 months in. I can tell you that. So let's get started. We'll look at the Plot and Publish tab in Options. Has anybody gone to this tab and set things up before you've plotted before? Okay, that's about what I expected. So I'm surprised that more people don't go here first. There's a lot of options in here that can be set before you even start to plot that you can set beforehand and get them set as default options for you so you don't have to set it in the plot dialog box itself when you go to plot. And a lot of them are just simple little quick clicks that maybe only takes a few seconds in the plot dialog box to set it. But the thing is, if you're plotting on a daily basis, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, these little clicks do add up and you can actually save quite a bit of time by setting some of these things beforehand. So we'll just go through some of these settings quickly. The first, the box up here in the top left, the Use Default Device and Use Last Successful Plot settings. Those are your 2 options you can choose from. The default option is Use as Default Output Device. What you can do here is set a plotter. So if you're in a small office and maybe you only have 1 plotter, every time you go to plot, you have to go and choose that plotter. If you set that here as your default option, then that will come up as the one you choose every time. It will already be there for you. And the other thing that this will do is, I know probably not a lot of people are still on AutoCAD 2000 or before, but any files you open that could be from somebody that's on an older version, it will default to that setting or to that plotter that you've chose here as well. The Use Last Successful Plot settings will do just as it says. Whatever the last successful plot you sent, it will just default to those settings and remember those for you. Add or configure plotters is where you can set your PC3 files. We're going to skip that now. We'll go over that in a little more in depth in a little bit, but that will bring you to the Windows Explorer box where all your PC3 files are stored and also where you can create new ones. On the left-hand side here on the bottom, some of the options there, plot to file. That's if you're plotting PLT files for printing purposes. This will choose where those will be saved by default. So again, if you have a folder where you save all your PLTs, you can go here and set that, and then when you print those PLTs, you won't every time have to go and search and maneuver to that folder. Background processing options. Publishing is on by default, plotting is not. What this will do, if you haven't used it, is it will allow you to publish or print all your files in the background, just as it says. So let's say you have 30 plots that you want to send, and you're doing a batch print job through Publish. If you go to send those, you can just sit there and watch them sort of open up and print and wait for it. But if you have background publishing turned on, it will do it in the background, just as it says, and that way you can continue working in AutoCAD and continue working as your plot jobs are publishing. And we're going to go over publishing in depth in a little bit too. Plotting is not on by default. I've never really seen anybody use background processing for plotting. Plotting usually, if you're sending a plot, it's usually just one sheet, so it's sort of quick anyways. I know some people do more of that, so that's why it is there as an option, but we don't see it as often that people are using that one. But if you do use it and you're plotting several jobs, then that option is there as well. The log file is there if you want to save a history of everything that you've plotted. So this comes in handy if you want to, your project manager comes to you and says, hey, 3 months ago we sent out this sheet. What day was that we sent that, or where did we send that file? The log file, if you're saving that, you can easily go and look and find that. The options are to save one continuous, or you can save one per plot. And auto publish is another option that we don't see used very often, but what that will do is anytime you close or save a file, it will automatically send a plot and create either a PDF, DWF, or DWFX for you if you want it to. So we don't see it used very often. It seems like it might be a bit much for most people. I don't know that there's a lot of scenarios where you would want to be sending or creating a PDF or DWF every single time you're saving. But the option is there for you if that's something that you have a need for. And then on the right-hand side, just some general options. The first two are about page size. So a lot of this is driven by the drivers that you have set. So if you have the first one not set, which is just keep the layout paper size if possible, what that will do is it will look at the driver, it will look at the page size that you've chosen. It will also be able to read the plotter and see if that paper size is available for you. If it is, then everything is good. It will go ahead and send it. If for whatever reason that page size is not available, it will give you a message and tell you, hey, there's a problem here, that's not going to work. And working in big offices myself, we had times when people would go and change the roll size and you wouldn't realize they had done that, or things like that happen, and you send your plot, half an hour ago everything was great, but now that roll size is different. So it's good to know and get that warning so that you don't send a plot anyways and you go to pick it up and now you've wasted paper and it doesn't look the way you want it to. It's a good warning to get. Excuse me. The spooling and OLE are in your handout. There's a pretty in-depth description of those. Some of this stuff I'm gonna sort of pass by quickly in the interest of time because we'd be here for 3 hours. But the things I do skip over, it is in your handout, and I have my information at the end as well. So if there's something that I sort of pass over today in this demonstration, but you wanted more information on it, feel free to contact me after you get back, and I'll be happy to help with those. I did want to talk about hide system. It's a good one. For anybody that uses PC3s, what this will do is it will hide the system printer so you only see the PC3s. This comes in handy because if you have, say, 15 plotters on your network and you have them all that you have to plot to at certain times, if your company uses PC3s, what you're going to do is when you go to the AutoCAD plot dialog box and go to choose your printer, you're going to see all those PC3s you set up, but you'll also see all the system printers. Now typically you're only going to be choosing the PC3s if you've had those set up. So you have double the plotters there, and it gets a little messy. It can be a little harder to scroll through. So go ahead and check that on if you use PC3s, and then that's all you'll see. And it's just a little bit easier to go and choose your plots. If you're offsetting your plots, and if you haven't used that, offsetting allows you to sort of move the objects that you're printing around the sheet. So you can move in the X or Y direction. It comes in handy because we've all probably had plots that we've sent, and you might check center the plot, and you know the paper size is right, your scale is right, but it's still just not quite right. You know, it's just not centered. What the plot offset will allow you to do, and we'll look at it in the plot dialog box, but you can move that plot as much or as little as you want in the X and Y direction. So what this option does is chooses where you're offsetting that from. The printable area, you've probably seen in the layout tab, you have that dashed line around it, right? That's your printable area. So that's the area that's going to print, right? So if you choose to offset from there, that's where that offset's going to start. The edge of the paper is just as it says, the edge of the paper. And that's the actual white box that you see when you're in your layout tab. So those are your two options as to where you want to offset those from. The offsetting does take a little bit of trial and error if you're using that. You know, you might have to print one and then see how far it offset it and adjust it based on that. But it's a good option if you're struggling to get the thing centered and it just won't seem to go. Sort of a manual override to help you do that. The plot stamp settings we're going to look at, again, just in a little bit in depth, so I'm going to pass that for now. The plot style tables, I'm actually going to open up an AutoCAD and show that. This is where you can choose whether you want to use CTB or STB files for when you plot. So here in AutoCAD, we have this plot style table settings. Your two options are to use either color-dependent plot styles or to use named plot styles. The color-dependent, those are your CTBs, and the named plot styles are your STBs. And we will discuss both of those in more description in a little bit, so you can decide which ones are best for you to use. But you know, we get a lot of questions in support where somebody will call and they'll say, hey, I'm only seeing the STBs and I want to use CTBs. This may be on, right? This option here may be on by default. I can't sort of see around the corner, but that may be on by default where that's the one they're choosing, and that's why they're always seeing those. So if you always use STB or you always use CTB, go ahead in here and just set that as your default, and that way it's going to save you a little time from having to go and change that. Once you choose the one that you're going to use for default, you can also choose which actual file you want to use. So right now I'm set to CTB, so I'm seeing all the CTBs on my system. But you can go and set that so that that's your default one every time. And then the add or edit, right? The add or edit plot styles tables. This will bring you right to the folder where all of those files are stored. Has anybody been in here and had to modify CTB files or STBs before? Okay. So if you haven't, we'll just open one up and look at it quickly, right? So if I just open up the standard, we'll open up the hatch one, all right? Gives you some information, just some general information about that CTB file. And then this form view tends to be the one where most folks do go and modify this file. So you'll see it shows you all of the 255 colors that you have available in AutoCAD. And for each one, you can go and set these settings exactly how you want. So again, we'll get into a little more later, but the CTBs, for instance, it's based on the color of the objects, how it's going to plot out what the line weight will be, for instance. So this here, you can set that color exactly how you want it to be. You can choose the color that you want. Yep. All these settings here, I'm going to briefly go over it. That could almost be a whole class by itself. So I'm going to briefly go over it. That's one of the things that if you want to, after the class, give me your information, and I'll be happy to, meet up with you afterwards. But just some of the options: dithering, grayscale. You can set, if you're using a pen plotter, you can set the exact pen you want that to use. You can set the line weight for that color. So there's a lot of options in here. You can change what the line weights are. You can add new ones. You can add some custom ones in there. So a lot of options in here. There's a lot of control for how you can get your plots to look out, or how you want them to look when you plot. So this is the CTB one, and it's a really good thing to use. Typically what happens is your CAD manager will have those all set up for you. If you're in an office where you have a CAD manager. So when you go to plot, you'll actually see those all set up and in there for you. If you don't have a CAD manager, then you may not have those CTBs to use. A lot of people call in and they don't even choose one. They just leave that option on none. It's okay to do that, but you're not getting really what the file should look like when you do that. So if you don't have a CAD manager, again, it might be something that maybe you take it on and set some up. It's really helpful, and your company would probably appreciate it to have those set up. Like I said, in the interest of time, we can't go over it in detail right now. Just going over the basics of it. But if it's something that you want to do, feel free to contact me. After the class, come on up and give me your information, and I'd be happy to help you going forward to help get those set up. But it's a really powerful tool to use those CTBs or STBs. So let's take a look at the plot dialog box itself in AutoCAD. And again, this is the box that most people are familiar with, that most people have seen when they go to plot. The first thing that I always tell people when they go to plot is this little arrow here in the bottom right corner. Go ahead and expand that so that you see all the options. What happens in AutoCAD when you go to plot, it actually looks like this when you first go to the plot dialog box, which is probably what you've seen. That arrow there on the bottom right is not expanded, so you're missing almost half of the options that you have there in the plot dialog box. Right. So, by the way, does anybody know why they have that off by default? No? I was just hoping somebody knew, because I don't. Yeah. No, I mean, it seems like it should be on by default. This is where you would set and choose those CTBs or STBs, for instance, which is, as we just discussed, a very important thing. There's some background options in here. The plot step is over here, your orientation. So it seems like it should be on by default, but for whatever reason, it's not. So the first thing that I would say when you go to your plot is make sure that that's turned on. The first time you send a plot, as long as that's on, it's going to remain on for you, so then you'll always see it. But if you're not aware that that's there, or don't, for whatever reason, have never looked down and seen this little arrow, you may not even realize it's there, and you're missing out on a lot of options. So go ahead and turn that on as a first thing. So looking through some of these options here, the page setup, we're going to open up AutoCAD and look at that briefly. Does anybody use page setups in AutoCAD? Okay, that's good, about a third. So if you're not, it's another real good time-saving technique that you can use, because you have a lot of options in here that you're choosing, right? You're choosing your plotter that you want to use. So for instance, I'll just choose DWG to PDF. You're setting your page size that you're using in here. If you're using offsets, this is where you would set those, your orientation. All these settings are here, right? And if you use different ones each time, you're probably spending upwards of 5 minutes setting those every time and making sure everything is all set. What you can do is set all those settings, get everything the way you want, and then say Add on Page Setup. And you can go ahead and give this a name, so I'll call this PDF plot. And say OK. And now that's always going to be there as an option for you. So what I can do now is if I go and change a lot of these settings, right? And now if I go back to the PDF plot, you'll see it switches back and goes back to everything that I had. You can save as many of those as you want in each file. So they are file specific, so they would have to be set up for each DWG. But once you have them set up, they're always going to be there. And it really does prove to be a big time saver. And we'll also, as we look at in publishing a little later, this is a very crucial part for publishing as well, because this is where you can set those options that you can really give more control over what your published job is going to do and the options your published job is going to respect. So that page setup is a good one to use. The printer plotter section here, pretty self-explanatory. That's obviously where you choose what you're going to plot to. But what we're going to look at with regards to that is this properties box next to your printer. Does anybody ever go into this properties and look around? Okay, again, maybe about half. If you don't, there's a lot more controls in here that you can choose. This properties box is driven by the driver that you're choosing, right? So in this instance, I have my PDF driver chose. So the options I'm going to see are going to be specific to what you would find in a PDF. If you choose an image file, you're going to see options specific to image. Or an actual plotter, it will pull the driver options for that one. So it's not going to look the same every time. It's going to be specific to that driver that you chose. But for instance, we'll just look at the PDF one and look at some of the options. If I go to graphics, you'll see that I have vector graphics that I can choose, or merge control, right, where you can choose if you want your lines to merge or not. So these are options that if you're not going into properties, your plot's going to come out and just look the way it does, and you may not even realize that you have the ability to change those things if you wanted to. You can add custom paper sizes if you want in here, right? So you can go and add a custom paper size if the size that you want is not available. A lot of times, especially if you're doing PDFs or DWFs, you might be plotting odd sizes, 24 by 60, 24 by 80, things like that. This is where you would go and add those paper sizes so that they're available for you to choose. In custom properties, if you choose custom properties up top here, it will bring up this custom properties box at the bottom. And this is, again, where a lot of the meat is in here in your PC3. So again, I chose PDF. So right now my options are DPI. So if you want this thing to be a little bit clearer, of course, you increase the DPI, the size goes up, but sometimes it's necessary, right? We need it to be that. So this is where you would go and you're able to change those DPI options. Yes? I'm sorry, what was that? Yeah. So the question was, just for the recording, if the plotter's a network plotter, does everybody have access? Right. I can check that after. I'm not sure. I think there's settings where you can control whether it's available or not.
I think what happens is that, like in our situation, our drivers actually right on the network, but when we pull those drivers down, that driver actually comes from we make actually tweak driver. Every time you plot, if you believe it to install it or the driver gets updated, every update over the machine. Not looking at that.
So what I did, I just went to Plotter Man. I just went to the folder where the CTBs are. Just right-clicked on it and went to Properties. So it looks like there are read-only. There's read-only. So if it's on your network and those users are restricted, right, if they don't have that access, then it looks like that's where you can control that and turn that on so they don't have the ability to change it. So yeah, just to get back, so there's a lot more options in here. For PDFs, this is also where you choose your layer information, whether or not you want the layers included, which is a nice new feature over the past few years. So it's worth taking a look at when you plot, when you set up your PC3s. Go ahead in there and take a look, and there's a lot more settings you can choose depending on the standards your office has. Page size. Self-explanatory again. We'll get in and look a little bit later where you can actually control what sizes you see here. So most offices that I've worked with or at, you don't usually use all 100 of these sizes or whatever is there, and it can be a bit of a pain to go and have to filter through them. You can actually control this list and have it down to as few as one size if you want, right? If there's only one size you ever plot for a specific plotter, you can go and eliminate all the others and make them invisible, or make them hidden rather, and that way it's easier for your users. They can just go in and they only see the sizes that you're actually going to plot to. It's a nice feature. In the lower left part here. The plot area decides where you're going to plot to. And there's actually 5 different options that can be available at any given time depending on what plotter you chose and what scale you chose. A lot of that ties into what's actually available. The 5 options are layout limits. Actually, if we go I'll open it up over here. So for PDFs, there's only the 3, display, limits, and window. There's also 2 others called view. Let me see, there's layout, limits, extents, display, view, and window. So we're not seeing extents or view here. The view, I don't know if anybody uses the views command in AutoCAD, but you can actually, it's an older command, so we don't see it used as much, but you can actually choose views that you can go to the view command, and I don't know, I have to be careful with my time because if I keep on getting sidetracked, we won't have enough. But the view, you can go to view and actually go and if you pick on the view that you have saved, it will go right to an area of AutoCAD that you've already saved. So you can actually choose those in this plot dialog box, so it will print the actual view that you've set up if you want. Yep. Yes. Yep. Again, depending on the plotter and the layout, yep, you might have different options. I'm just going to briefly go through all 5 so that you'll see when they're there. So the layout, and again, just right from the handout, when plotting a layout, plots everything with the printable area of the specified paper size, calculated from 0, 0. So it will plot that layout as you have it set up. Display plots just what you see in your current view. Extents will plot everything that you actually have in your view. So whatever entities are actually in your view, it will plot all of those out. Be careful with extents if scaling is important to you, because extents will sort of ignore the scale and just plot whatever scale it needs to fit everything on that paper. And window, self-explanatory, you can just go and just choose an actual windowed area in your plot that you want to plot to. The plot offset is what we were talking about earlier. This is where you can set that. So you could offset either to an X or Y section. You'll also see this right here where it says origin set to printable area. What this does is this corresponds to whatever option you set. So I had printable area set, so it says this. Just as an example, if I go back to options now and say, well, I'm going to set edge of paper instead and apply that. Now when I go back to my plot dialog box, you'll see that that's set that now. It changed it over. So this way you don't have to go back to options and see what you have set. It will actually tell you right there. In the right side, this is the option that we opened up with this arrow. This is where you would choose your plot style table. Again, the CTB or the STB that you've chose to use. Shaded view plot, or viewport rather, there's a really big in-depth section for that in your handout. So again, that could actually be probably a half-hour, 45-minute section on its own. So I'm not going to touch on that here, but in your handout there's a really big section on that. And again, if there's any questions on that, feel free to contact me. Once you get back to your office, and I'll be happy to answer any of those questions. A few of the options I wanted to look at in the plot options. First, there's this plot and background, and I want to touch on that because this is also the same option that we saw in the options dialog box, where you can set your plotting to the background or not. So anybody that's used AutoCAD for a long time, you know that there's oftentimes 5 or 10 ways to do the same thing in AutoCAD in different boxes. So sometimes you'll go and you'll say, oh, I thought I turned that option off, right? But it's because it was turned on in a separate area, so it also turned it on there. So this checkbox will be on or off depending on what you chose in your options. We had the background plotting for plotting off, so that's why it's not checked here. So just to keep in mind, if that's turning on or off, it's probably because in options it was changed. And the other thing I want to look at in depth right now is the plot stamp. I don't know if anybody here uses plot stamps in your file, but it's a really neat, little tool to help you see quickly on the paper plot that you've printed out, or on the PDF or DWF, when that plot was sent, where it was sent by. There's really a lot of options in there that you can choose to determine how that's going to be. So if I check this plot stamp on, for instance, what you'll see is this plot stamp settings box appears. So that's going to be there or not be there depending on whether or not that box is checked. And actually, let me just open up a quick. So this is your title sheet, right? So if you go into plot and you say I'm going to plot to, sure, we'll do PDF, that's fine, and 8.5 by 11. And you say, I want the plot stamp on, right? So you can go into here, and these are all the options that you have. You can choose if you want your plot stamp to list the drawing name, the layout name, the date and time that it was plotted. The login name is going to be the user that is logged in when this was plotted. It will give you that user's name. So it's nice and handy if you want to be able to tell who plotted a certain sheet at a later time. This is what login name does. Device name, so you can see where it was plotted to, paper size, plot scale. Are some options. There's also user-defined fields. So if there's another option up here that you want that is not here, you can set some user-defined. This field here shows which plot stamp file you're using. The plot stamps have a PSS extension. You can set as many of these as you want. The default one that is set is inches.pss is what it's called. I do recommend, if you're going to use plot stamps, create your own with your own name. What can happen is if a user sends you their file and they happen to send you their inches.pss and your user may not realize and just overwrite the one that's in there, and then all of a sudden your settings are gone. So if you're going to use these plot stamp settings, go ahead and create your own PSS with a custom name for your company or whatever you're going to use, and that way you can avoid that danger of it being overwritten. So this field is where you can choose which PSS you want to use. In the advanced field, this is where you can choose where you want it to be, for instance. You can put it on any corner of the sheet. You can choose whether you want it to be horizontal or vertical. So for instance, if you wanted it to be this way or this way up the side, you can choose that there. You can offset it. You can choose how far away from either, again, the edge of the paper or the edge of the printable area that you want that plot stamp to be. Choose the units for it. You can choose a different font. If you don't like the one that's chosen, if you have a standard font that needs to be used in your office, you can go ahead and set it here. And choose if a log file is going to be created. So for instance, now that this is on, and I'll just keep the default settings for now, if I do a preview of this, what you'll see now, let me set that to extents and then preview. There we go. So you can see your title sheet, and what you have now is up the side, you see that plot stamp there with all the options. So it's really handy. You know, you might get 6 months down the road and then you're looking at an old drawing set and you want to see, you know, when was this thing plotted, right? Because sometimes you might have to go back to a certain time and they want to see what the project looked like then. This can be really handy for that. So again, it's a tool that surprisingly, and again, I work in support, so I hear from a lot of customers, and it's surprisingly something that I hear more people saying, I didn't know that was available, I didn't know that was there. So a really nice tool to help your file management down the road. And then on the last section is your drawing orientation, where you can choose. You have the image here. What you'll see in AutoCAD is sort of just a nice little feature. Depending on what you choose, you'll see this A, so you can see how it's actually going to plot out. I know sometimes if things are upside down and the plotters have different rules to them, so you don't always know exactly. This is a nice little way just to see how that's going to come out. So the next section we're going to look at is PC3 files and PMP files in AutoCAD. So PC3 and PMP files are really powerful tools to use in AutoCAD. If you're not using them, it's definitely something worth looking into and seeing if it's something you want to use. PC3 files, just a few things here that you can do with them. Easily configure your plot settings, such as color depth, media type, media source. There's a lot more options in there that you can choose. Those are just a few of them. You can save your common settings for later use. So again, similar to that page setup that we looked at, where you could actually change your settings, you can do the same thing for your plots. So if you have custom sizes that you're going to use, you don't have to set those up over and over again. You can set them, save it as a PC3 file, and then it's good to go. You have it ready there. You can create as many PC3 files as you want per device as well. So, I've had users that have had big plotters and they have 8 different PC3s, right? One for 24 by 50, 24 by 60, 24 by 70. It's good to do it that way because what can happen is you can set up multiple custom sizes in your sheet or in your actual Windows printer device. But what we've seen is those get changed quite often. Another user might come in and decide, oh, we don't need that custom size, and they change it on you. When the drivers get updated, those might get skewed. With the PC3, if you have each one of those saved with the settings you want, that's always going to be there. Those won't change, and those can be easily distributed to all your users. So let's actually create one here in AutoCAD and just walk through that process. So what I find is the easiest way. There's multiple ways to get into where you can create them. What I find the easiest way is just to type Plotter Manager, and if you spell it right at your command line, it will bring you right to the Windows dialog box where any current PC3 files that you have are stored there. You'll also see in this is there's an Add a Plotter wizard. Right? So this is the wizard you can use to go and create extra PC3 files. So if we just go to the wizard, it tells you a little bit about what the wizard does, just that you can create the file. And then you have 3 options: My Computer, Network Plotter Server, or System Printer. And in your handout on page 15, there is a description of what each one of those does. But just to go over it briefly, the My Computer will search for any HIDE drivers that are connected to your specific computer. The Network Plotter Server will also search for HIDE or System Printer drivers that are on any computers that you're connected to on your network. So if all of your printers are up on a server, which is how a lot of companies do that, this will allow you to see all those printers on your server as well. And then the System Printer uses any system printers that are installed on your computer directly. So because I don't have access to a lot of my machines that are back at my office here, I'm just going to choose System Printer and look at the ones that are directly on my machine. So you say next after you choose System Printer, and these are all the devices that I currently have on my machine. So what you can do is you say, well, for this instance, let's create one for the Qt PDF Writer, which, by the way, if you haven't used Qt PDF Writer, it's a free driver to create PDFs. It's a really nice little driver. Works really well. It's very stable. Printing to PDF can sometimes be tricky. I shouldn't be saying this, but the DWG to PDF driver is not always the most stable. We have issues with page sizes, and it's just there's some issues there. So if you experience problems creating PDFs, I would highly recommend go to qtpdf.com, and it's a free driver that works really well. So I'm going to create a PC3 for this one here, right? So I chose the printer that I want to use. I go ahead and say next. The first thing it's going to do is give you the option to import any older settings from your PCPs or your PC2s, which are the old printer files that used to be used in AutoCAD. I don't remember the version that this switched, but I think it was AutoCAD 2000, 2000i, somewhere around there. These stopped being used. So we have a lot of people ask us, well, why do you still have this in there, right? Nobody uses PCPs or PC2s anymore. But I think they've left it in there just so that if there is somebody there, right? Murphy's Law says if we take this out, next thing you know, we're going to get a flurry of calls saying, how do I import these, right? So it doesn't hurt anything to have it there. If you don't want to import them, you can easily just skip right by it. This is where you can choose your plotter name that you're going to choose. This name is the name you're going to see in your AutoCAD plot dialog box drop-down window when you go to choose your plotter. So this is important, especially if you're making multiple PC3s for the same device. So if you have a printer called Second Floor LaserJet, right, you may not want to call this Second Floor LaserJet if you're going to be creating multiple ones, because then it's going to be confusing what each one does. So what I've seen a lot of people do if they're creating multiple PC3s for multiple sizes, they'll actually add the name right in there. So for instance, if this was going to be a 24 by 60 sheet, you can call it Qt PDF Driver 24 by 60. And then it will just show up right in your drop-down as that name, and it's easy to tell which one is set for which options. Say next on this, the edit plotter configuration. Again, this is going to bring you into the PC3 options itself that you can modify. And we'll go and look at those in a minute after we have this created. You can choose to calibrate the plotter if you want to. Those are those options here. Once you say finish, within a few seconds, you'll see that new PC3 is going to show up in your list. And in addition to it showing up in your list, it's now going to be an option for you in your drop-down list in AutoCAD. So if we go into that PC3 and just look at it in a little more depth, this is where we looked earlier as well, right? So this is where you can go and change. And I want to show this one just so you can see this looks quite different from the one we looked at earlier. So this just sort of shows that depending on the driver and which type of plotter you're printing to, you're going to see different options in there. So what we're seeing now are the options for the Qt PDF driver that are pulled from those files. The PMP files, if I can find my slideshow. PMP files, these are created to save any custom settings that you make for the PC3. So you actually can't go and create a PMP on its own without a PC3 already there and available for you. But things like the most common one that people use it for is custom page sizes. If you're making custom page sizes for your PC3, it will create a PMP file that stores all those settings for you. So that gets done automatically. You can also save your calibration settings. So let's look at that real quick. We'll make one here from those settings. If I go back to AutoCAD. So what you'll see is when you go to Plotter Manager, this is where all the PC3s are located. You also see a PMP Files folder, and that will show you any PMPs that are there. Again, you can't modify these here like you can a PC3 because they're connected to that PC3 file. Any modifications to this are actually done in the PC3 file itself, and then this PMP automatically gets updated. So you see I do not have one here right now for my DWG to PDF PC3. So what I'll do is if I go here, the joys of a live demo. It's never opening the file. So cancel. So I'm just going to try and go right by that and act like it didn't happen because I don't know what it's saying. But so if I go to custom paper sizes for this PDF and I say I'm going to start from scratch. Here's where I can choose my width and height. So I'm going to say, well, this one needs to be 24 by 100. It's a big banner I'm printing out, right? This is where you can choose your margins. And this is in the tips part at the end. But a lot of questions that we'll get is people will call us and they'll say, hey, you know what? I'm printing out. I know my scale's right. I know my size is right. But this thing just won't print. It's cutting off on the side. The margins is usually the first place we look. It's an option that not a lot of people know are there. But the margins are, you can set, and what it will do is it will actually determine on the top, bottom, left, and right where AutoCAD will start that plot. So it's a nice tool to have if you want a big space on the side, for instance, you know, to write in or put notes, then you can set that margin and have that. But if you're not aware that it's there, then it might be causing you some problems because you're getting these big spaces on the top and bottom, left and right. You may not know why it's there. If that's the case, the margins is the first place to go and look and set them. So in this instance, it's set at a quarter inch. I'll leave that at just for the demo. It's okay. Again, the page size, this is what it's going to be called. So it will take by default whatever size you put in, which is a nice little thing there, so it's easy to tell what it is, but you can set that to whatever size name you want it to be if you wanted to change that. And then you'll see that it's going to ask you what you want that PMP to be called. I'd recommend leaving it on the default there because it will pull from the PC3 name, and that way it's easy to go if for whatever reason you ever need to delete it. One of our troubleshooting tips when we have problems with PC3s is sometimes recreating them. As you saw a moment ago, it only takes a few minutes to create a PC3. If they're imported from prior releases, for instance, sometimes that can cause problems. So if there's a problem with it, usually the first step that we tell people to do is just to remove it and recreate it, since it's just quick, and then you have a nice new one to start with. It's the same thing with the PMPs, because we'll also ask you to delete that at the time as well, so you start from scratch there. So as long as you leave this the same name, it's going to be easy to know which ones correlate to each other. So we'll say next on that, it tells you you've created it. You can finish. And now you have that custom size set up. So if I now go and save that, and now if I go to AutoCAD and go to Plot, and I choose that DWG to PDF, you'll see that now I have that custom size as an option in there. So you'll see that right there. You'll also notice that now if I go to that Plotter Manager folder again and go to PMP Files folder, that it now automatically created that new that new PMP for that size. Any questions on that before we go on? I know the PC3s is a touchy subject, so I want to make sure I answer any questions if there are any on that. Sure. What's that? That's where any customizations that you make, it's mostly for custom page sizes. There's a few other calibration things that can be set, but we don't see that used very often. It's mostly for the custom page sizes. If you create custom page sizes for it, it will automatically create that PMP, and that's where it saves that information. It's handy because that way what you can do is if, for instance, a CAD manager will go and set up these PC3s and PMPs with all the settings that they want, and then you can just go and copy those out to the network if people are pulling from a network or to their individual folders, and then everybody has the same settings and the same sizes that may be necessary. Just two notes that I wanted to make about PMPs. These are in your handout on page 16 as well. And I'll just read them right here from the help file. Creating a custom paper size for non-system drivers attaches the PMP to it. If it's a system printer, then you can't create the custom sizes in the PC3. For system printers, you actually have to go to the driver, the Windows driver itself, and you can create the files in there. And I don't know if I have one of those. Let me see. So you see how it's grayed out there, right? So if you choose a system printer and try and modify it in the PC3 for that one, it's going to be grayed out. I'm not exactly sure why that's not available yet in AutoCAD, but I think it's just some issues with the drivers there that our developers have had. But if you go to the actual Windows driver, then you can create that custom size there, and then you'll see it in AutoCAD. So the next thing we're going to take a look at is publishing. Does anybody use publishing? Okay, quite a few. That's good. So publishing, for those who maybe haven't used it, as it says here, it's just a nice, quick, easy way to print out multiple files at once. So again, if you have 25 sheets you need to print, in the old days, you'd have to go one by one and print them out, and it would be a big pain. And then we got a little better, and we had batch plotting, which was better. But publishing, I think, was 2004, maybe. The publishing was introduced to AutoCAD, somewhere roundabouts there. But provides a really nice, quick way to print out multiple sheets at once while having a lot of control over how they're going to look and how they're going to be plotted. So if we go to AutoCAD, the one thing I would recommend with publishing is if you're going to publish, close all your files first. Start with just one sheet open only. For whatever reason, it just seems to clutter it down a little bit at times, depending on how big those other files are. So just as a tip, it seems to work a little better if you start without any files open. So if you can type it correctly, you will get into the Publish box. So the first thing you'll notice is there are some sheets here. What it will do is whatever open files you have, it's going to pull any model layouts or any model tabs and any layouts as well that you have. It's going to pull those in there automatically. Since you're starting with a blank sheet, you're typically not going to want to plot those. So the first thing to do, you can just select those and just delete them to move them out of there. Right? So when you go into publish, the first thing you're going to do is actually go and choose the files that you want to publish, that you want to plot. So I have a few test files that I've created. So you can select those and bring them in. And you'll then see them start to show up in the list. Now what you'll notice is that it has the model tab and the layout tab there. Most people nowadays when they plot, they're only plotting from the layout tabs. That's usually where everything is set up correctly. So you may not want the model tab there. You'll notice that one of the options, once you have files in here, if you right-click on any one of these files now in here, you'll see that you can include layouts and include models. They're both checked on right now, which is why I saw both. But if the majority of the time you're only going to be publishing one or the other, you can go in here and change these. So if I, for instance, uncheck model and erase those and bring them in again, you'll see now I'm only getting the layouts. So again, it's one of those things that if you insert them all, you can go and remove them. It doesn't take a lot of time, but over weeks, months, years, that time does add up. So just another little quick time saver for you in there. Once you have your files in here, you can right-click on it, and you get a lot of different options there that you can do. You can rename the sheet if you don't like it to be called File 1 Layout. It will just pull from the file name and then the layout name, so you can modify those sheet names. You also have the buttons up here that you can do it, so you can remove sheets if you decide, well, I don't want that one. You can just remove it out of there. You can modify the order of them by moving them up or down in the sheet, so that comes in handy if you bring in sheets from maybe 10 different directories. You can quickly change the order that you want them to be so that when you print them out, they're all going to be in the correct order. Saves a little time organization afterwards. The setup, we're going to look at this in just a minute. We'll actually go through and create that. But this page setup is, remember I said earlier, if you create a page setup, it's easier for plotting. This is actually where you can pull that from. So if you've set up a page setup in AutoCAD with all the settings that you want, this is how you want your plot to look. You can go and just pull it in there, and then it's going to remember that and print and publish with just those settings. And the status will tell you the status of the sheet. Mine say layout not initialized because I created these files just quickly for this class, and I actually never went to the layout, so that's why they say not initialized. But this will tell you what the status of those layouts are. I'm actually just going to bring those model back in for the next section. So the sheet list up here, right now it's set to none. What this will do is ask you if you want to save the current list of sheets. So this comes in handy. If you have the same sets that you're going to be publishing over and over again, you can go and save it as a DSD file, and it will save those options for you and save all the sheets. What happens is, at least in the places I've worked and the places I've seen, all your sheets are usually over your network, right? They're kind of everywhere. You have some in this directory, some in this directory. But when you print out a job set, you need to pull from all those different areas. So what this will do is you can pull them all in here, save it as a DSD, and that way next time you go to publish, you can just choose that DSD, and it will pull them all in, and you don't have to go to each directory and choose them individually the next time. So I'll say yes, and I'll just call it drawing 1. That's okay, and then that gets saved. And then next time you go in, you can actually just choose that. And then the save sheet list, just to save them. The publish to, this is where you can choose either the plotter named in the page setup, DWF, DWFX, or PDF. You can choose your format there. Just making sure I'm on time here. Up here in the top left under Publish Options, this is going to be if you're plotting to anything besides a paper sheet. So Here's where you can choose the location. If you're plotting to file, you can choose where you want those files to be saved. Under type, you can choose if you want a multi-sheet file or single sheet. So this comes in handy if you're printing to DWF, for instance. You can choose, do you want one DWF with just all of your layouts as separate tabs, or do you want a separate DWF for every single sheet? So this is where you can choose that. Depending on what you choose here, the next option, prompt for name or specify name. And depending on what you choose here, will determine what options are available. So if you say prompt for name, then the name here is not going to be available because it's going to prompt you on each sheet to name it what you want it to be named. Specify name, then you can actually go here and choose what you want that sheet to be called. This is only available on multi-sheet file because if you do single sheet file, then obviously each one is going to be popping up anyways and asking you for that information. Layer information, you can include layer information. I think for the past 4 or 5 releases they added that in there, so you can have layer information or not. And your merge control, whether or not you want the lines to overwrite. Password protection, you can password protect these files. The thing to keep in mind with password protection is there is no way to recover that password if it gets forgotten. And I've had people call me and they'll say, well, you must have it stored somewhere, right? It's got to be somewhere on Autodesk's network. I can tell you it's not. So keep that in mind. If for whatever reason you need to password protect your files for security reasons, keep that password safe somewhere because otherwise that file, we have no way to access it. Choose whether or not to include your block information on your file and whether or not you want to use a template file. So those are some of the options if you're using plotting to DWF. So the one thing I did want to show is just creating the template file and how that's used in here. And actually, before I do there, I'll just talk about the 3D DWF. You'll notice the 3D DWF is only available on 4 of these. You might have noticed it correlates to the model tabs. So if you are plotting a 3D DWF, you can only do that from the model tab. It's not available from layout yet. So keep that in mind. That's why those options are only there. But if I go back to AutoCAD for a moment, and I'm actually just going to open up that. I'll use this sheet here. So if you go to plot, and let's say you want to do 8.5 by 11, I'm going to plot to PDF. I'll choose my CTB as just a standard AutoCAD one. I'm going to choose extents for my plot, and I don't care about scale right now, so I'm just going to choose fit to paper. And I will add this as my publish test and say OK. And now that's saved in there. Once that's, you don't have to send a sheet. That's a question I get quite a bit. Once you create a page setup, do you actually need to send the plot for it to remember that? You don't. Once you save that page setup here, you don't have to actually plot. You can just cancel out of this box. It's still going to remember that. What I'm going to do now is do a save as, and I'm going to call this my publish template and say OK. Delete those. I'm going to add in my 4 sheets from earlier. Say OK. I'm actually just going to plot just the layout tabs because that's the only spot that I have information on these. So I'll remove these sheets. So what I just did there, I set up a template. And let me just go back a moment and explain that. The template is where you can save that page setup. So if you create a page setup with all the options that you're going to plot from, I highly recommend creating a template file where you save those page setups. And I recommend that you do that in a blank sheet. I've seen people that will create those templates. They'll have their layout or their sheet they're going to plot, and it has 10 viewports and 20 XREFs in there, and then they use that to create the page setup. What happens is Publish has come a long way. It's much better. When we first created it, it was a little finicky, I'll say, to where it could get overwhelmed. And so what happened is if you were creating your page setups from those big complex sheets, and then you try to choose it in here, and AutoCAD wouldn't like it, and your plots would fail. So what we found is that it liked it much better if you created those page setups from a blank sheet that's nice and clean with not a lot of information there. So it's better now, and most of the time it's going to be okay even if you choose a big complicated sheet. But just for the intents of making sure it works, we recommend creating it from just a blank sheet and have those templates there. So what you can do once you have that template created and you have all your sheets ready, you can come in here and say import, and I'm going to choose my published template that I saved, import that in there, and you'll now see that I have that page set up there, my published test page setup that I chose. You can then choose any other sheets that you want. Choose that published test, and now it's going to remember those settings and print those for you. In the bottom right here, again, just a few more options if you want to include that plot stamp or not that we went over. You can do that in the publish. Publish and background is checked by default, and the box that if you want to open it in whatever the correct viewer is after you've created it. So I'm just going to go ahead and say publish here. It's going to prompt me for a name. I will just publish it here. I'll keep it on publish template. It's asking me if I want to save the list of current sheets up here. I'm going to say no just for this test. And now you'll see that it tells you it's publishing in the background. It's letting you know what's happening. The other thing is if you look down here in the bottom right, you'll also see this little icon here with the plotter. And you can see it actually looks like the plots are going through. This is where you can determine if the publish job is actually working for you. Also, if you hold your mouse over that, it will actually tell you what sheet it's on. So right now it's publishing sheet 2 of 4, so I have those 4 files in there. Right now it's publishing 2 of 4, so you can kind of track and see where that's going. You can also double-click on this little icon down here. Actually, you can double-click on it once it's complete and see the options. So we'll just give this just a moment here. And you see the bubble now comes up, tells you the plot and publish job is complete, no errors or warnings found. You can click on this and it will bring you up and tell you about the published job that you just sent. And you see they all plotted without any type of errors. The most common error that we see in here is if you're missing that CTB or STB file, where if someone didn't choose that, and now it's not there for the plot. So that's the most common error that we see. But it will also tell you things like if the page size wasn't available, those sorts of things. It will let you know why it didn't print out. So if I now go to, and I did have the box checked on for it to open automatically, so no, I'm not sure why it didn't. But if I now go to this DWF that I printed out, open up in Design Review. And so I just had some simple shapes as these, but you can now see I have one DWF with the 4 different thumbnails, the 4 different tabs for those in there. So the publish, again, just to recap that, you can use it to plot to DWF, DWFX, PDF, or an actual device that you have set in your page setup. And it's a real big time saver to get those files out. The next section we'll look at is plotting on a Mac. And again, like I said, I do apologize. I had more set up, but I had some issues with my Mac, so it's not here. So I have a few slides just to show some basics of AutoCAD plotting on AutoCAD for Mac. This is what your plot dialog box looks like in AutoCAD for Mac. So you'll notice that most of the options are the same that you have. They may be in a little bit of a different order. They may be in a different spot. But those are all your options there. The Edit Page Setup button is the one I don't have a slide showing that, but that's where you're going to go in and choose things like your PC3 file and some of those options in there. The one thing to keep in note for AutoCAD for Mac is this question mark down here is a really useful tool. This will bring you into the help. Now, I know for AutoCAD for Windows, the help isn't always the best, but for AutoCAD for Mac, it's actually very good. I think because AutoCAD for Mac, when they made it a few years ago, everything was from scratch. Everything was brand new. So they were sort of able to really do it the right way. So the help files for Mac, for instance, if you choose on that help for the printing, this is what you're going to see. So you can already see it probably looks a little bit neater and cleaner than it does on the Windows. But you have all these options for what you want to do, how you want to do it, and it's really good. It brings you through those settings one by one, and it's a really nice, clean help file. In your handouts, I also gave a few links to use. The YouTube link, I would really recommend looking at. For example, I did this one, AutoCAD for Mac for plotting. But if you go to this channel in here for AutoCAD for Mac, there are hundreds of videos up there for each type of different, whatever you may be trying to do, there's going to be a video up there for it. Again, the Mac stuff, I think Mac users tend to maybe be a little more internet savvy in some instances, so there's a lot of these really good videos and things up there for AutoCAD for Mac. So again, I apologize if you were here from Mac. I don't have more, but again, if you want more information, please see me afterwards, and I'll be happy to link up with you at another time. So we'll look at some tips that we have here for AutoCAD. And the first one is not to create a PDF from a DWF or vice versa. And this is the option that I gave, but it really applies to any types of file. So if you've ever plotted a sheet out and then somebody needs a copy of it, and you go and you just make a copy of that sheet instead of creating a new one, and then they need a copy, so you make another one. By the time you get to that fifth or sixth copy, if you look at the original, it's faded, it doesn't look good. It's similar with electronic files, right? So if you create a PDF from a DWG, and then you go and you need a DWF, so you create that from the PDF, and then somebody needs a DWFX, so you create that from the DWF. As you get 4 or 5 layers down, that file is going to be really a dirty file. It's going to be ripe for corruption and those sorts of things. So I highly recommend, we see this all the time, where people just create files from other existing files. If you have the DWG available, I highly recommend always create your files from the original whenever you can, and it's going to save you a lot of trouble with corruption and those sorts of things. Educational plot stamp. Do we have anybody using the educational version of AutoCAD? Okay. So here's the thing with the educational plot stamp, for those who aren't aware. All of our products are available for free for students, including AutoCAD. The difference is if they download the educational version, and when they plot, there's a stamp on that plot that says created by educational version. And it's meant so that those, we want our students, the young students and kids, to be able to use our products and get to know them as they get into the industry, but we don't want them used for commercial use. So that's why we have that stamp on there. What happens is if you're using a file that was created by the educational version, that stamp will now be on your file. So if you bring in a block, or if you bring in that file as an XREF into your file, that stamp is going to be there. Now there are 3 warnings. So it will tell you when you open up this file, this was created by an educational version. You'll have a stamp on your file. Are you sure you want to do this? Right? And then you say, okay. When you go to save, it's going to give you 2 more warnings and say, if you save this, that stamp will be on there. The thing to keep in mind is at Autodesk, we do not have a way to remove that stamp once it's in there. So it's one of those things that I think, and again, I've worked in the industry. I know it's a Friday night, you're trying to get that job out, and you get the warning message, and you just say, oh, I don't have time for that right now, right? And you just go on and you move on and you print it. And then Monday comes and you say, wait a minute, I have this stamp on all my files now. Why is that there? So be careful with that, because like I said, I think customers think that Autodesk has a way to remove that stamp. We really don't. So once that's on there, it's permanent. It's not going to go away. So be very careful. Yes? No. Once it's in there, it remembers it for those objects. So even if you copy and paste out or W block, it's going to stay in there. It's something that they take pretty seriously at Autodesk, trying to keep the commercial rights separate from the students. So just something to keep in mind. If you see that, be aware that it's going to be permanent. We talked a little bit about PDFs and alternate drivers. I just did want to mention that one more time. The DWG to PDF PC3 file, does seem to be a little flaky at times. So if that happens, again, I mentioned Qt PDF is a really good one that we've found. PDF995.com is another free one that tends to be really good. I've personally had better success with Qt PDF, which is why I list that one here. But either of those are good PDF drivers to use if you're having trouble with DWG to PDF. If you're going to be sharing your PC3s or PMPs, we talked about how you can do that and get them between machines so everybody has the same sizes. What I would recommend is make sure that everybody has the same version of Windows, AutoCAD, and the print drivers. So we get a lot of calls where people say, I sent my buddy over here on my PC3s, and he's getting an error. He can't print it. And we'll find out that, well, he's on Windows XP and you're on Windows 7. So it doesn't like that if you're sharing. The other thing I'd recommend is if you're going to a new version of AutoCAD, recreate the PC3s. They can be migrated over, but again, it's something that, for whatever reason, it doesn't necessarily like it if you copy them from previous versions. It's just the new version of AutoCAD is going to have different files in there. It doesn't like those. Excuse me for a moment. So since it's so quick to create those, we recommend just create new ones if you go to a new version. Some common issues that we see. When I publish my sheets, not all of the sheets will print out. Why is that? So it could be several different things. A few of them are recreate that, actually it's, that should say DSD. So if you're publishing and those sheets do not come out, if you chose the DSD up there and you chose your settings, the first thing you might want to try is recreating that. What can happen is if sheets get moved, you may choose that DSD and all the files come in. But what you're realizing is somebody went and deleted 5 of those files that were in that DSD. AutoCAD may have trouble reconciling that and finding out, well, where's those missing files? And so it may not print those. So always look at that first. If you have set up a template file for it, the other thing to do is maybe recreate that template file. And that's especially, like we said, if you've created your template file from a really complex sheet, that's where we'll usually see that as a problem. But recreating that template file is another good place to look. Try plotting to or publishing to a different printer plotter and see if they sheet. So you may have bad drivers or outdated drivers for the device that you're trying to send it to. So the drivers is a good thing to look at. If you plot to a different device and it works, then you'll know that it's not a problem with AutoCAD, but it's actually a problem with that device that you're trying to send it to. And try sending a smaller amount of sheets. System resources. Most people nowadays have really good machines and good memory, but there's still some that are lagging behind. So it may just be you bumping up against system resources. So if that's the case, maybe create 2 published jobs. If you have, for instance, 50 sheets and you're trying to send them all at once, create 2 published jobs, 25 each, and you may find that sending those smaller ones go through. It's 2 published jobs, but it's still going to be quicker than sending them all individually. When I send my file to the plotter, AutoCAD gives an error that it cannot be plotted. Why is this? And I left that generic because it could be any one of several different errors. But if this happens, first thing to do is to try sending a different file to that same plotter. So in support, what we do is we're trying to narrow down and troubleshoot where the problem may be coming from. So what we try and do is eliminate where it could be first and narrow down that where your trouble could be coming from. If you plot a different file and it works, then you know that it's actually the file that's a problem in all likelihood and not the actual device. If other sheets you print and they also don't print out, then the problem is likely with the plotter. And you can look at the drivers, see if there's updated drivers, test other sizes. There was a problem a few years ago with HP and 11 by 17 that we saw quite a bit, where people trying to plot 11 by 17 to HP devices just gave a lot of errors for whatever reason. So it might just be a size issue where that particular size has a problem. So that's something else to check. If everything that you try fails, and there's a few other things in there, but at the end, you may just need to recreate that PC3 and PMP file. And sometimes just recreating that, getting a fresh one, then everything's going to go through smoothly for you. Hatching too, and I have it under this question, but this really applies to a lot of these here. The hatching takes up a ton of system resources. And especially if you have a file with a lot of hatching in there, that's really going to chew up your memory. So if you don't need to plot all the hatch, maybe you're just plotting a certain area, go ahead and just freeze that hatch that you're not using or turn it off, put it on a layer that you turn off, whatever you need to do. But sometimes taking the hatch out of the out of the process, and then things will plot correctly. The third one up here, if the plot style, in the plot style table section of the plot dialog box, it tells me the CTB STB file is missing. How do I find it? Usually when this happens, it's because you've got a file from a client or a customer of yours, and they've sent you that over. They may have their own custom CTB or STB that they use that they didn't send, right? In the hurry to get the file to you, they send the DWG, and they don't think about whatever else they may need to send you. So the good thing is that most people don't mind sharing these. So the best thing to do is to send them a message, just let them know that you're missing that. They'll send it right over to you. If you go to that plotter manager command again, it will bring you up to that folder where you have the plot styles. Save it in there, restart that DWG, and then you'll see it listed as an option. What I don't recommend is if you see that it's missing, you can still plot, it will still plot out, but you're not going to get the right look. If they had certain line types set or things like that, those are all going to be missing. So take the time to just ask them to send that over to you and make sure that your plot looks the same as them. Typically on projects, people like things to look as it should. So my plot comes up, but some information is missing. So whenever information is missing, and what we'll have sometimes is people will plot a sheet, and there'll be a section on the right-hand side, for instance, that half the lines are not there. System resources, again, is going to be the first place to look for this in the memory. You may not have the latest driver. You'll notice with all these plotting issues, drivers are listed in each of those. Drivers is a really important factor in these. So always make sure you have the latest driver. If you have the latest driver and it still doesn't work, go back one version. With drivers, latest is not always greatest. So sometimes the new drivers just don't work as well with the AutoCAD as it should. So if you have the latest, go back one version. Your plot have enough ink in it. Not as common anymore, but if you still have an inkjet, it could be that ink is just out. It's something to check. And are all the layers turned on that you want to print? Is everybody aware of the no plot layer option in AutoCAD? Okay, so I won't show that then. But yeah, so check that too. If you're plotting from your layout, someone just might have checked on that as a no plot layer. My plot comes out, but it's clipped so that the entire sheet does not come out. So sometimes we'll see this too, where the plot comes out, it gets halfway through, and then cuts off and finish. It doesn't complete for you. Again, drivers are the first thing to look at. Some other things is the selected paper size the correct one. If you have sent a plotter to a plotter or a sheet to a plotter and that page size is not available, or maybe again someone changed the roll on you and that sheet's not there, the plotter may get confused and try and plot it out and then realize that something's not right and just cut it off. So always make sure you have the correct paper size selected or that the correct roll is in there. Modify the margins, which is something that we looked at with the PC3s. Remember the margins are in there? Maybe the margins for whatever reason got set to 10 inches on each side for whatever reason, and so it's cutting those off. And also look at the scale and make sure that the scale is set correctly for the sheet that you're trying to plot to. I'm trying to select a CTB file to plot with, but I only see my STBs. There is a command called convert P styles. So AutoCAD, for whatever reason, will only see CTB or STB. It will never see both of them at the same time in your drop-down list. So if you go in there and you're trying to see your CTBs and only STBs are listed there, use this convert P styles, and what that will do is that will switch it over so that you then see the other one, whichever one that you're seeing. We give out that command probably more often than any other in support, so it's a common issue that we see quite a bit. And the seventh one, if your images don't plot out, again, first thing to look at is lack of system resources. If you're spooling, try to send it direct to the plotter without spooling. But most likely, it's going to be a memory issue. So these are two commands in AutoCAD, raster percent and raster threshold, that are very useful. And these are both set to 20 by default. So to give a brief description of what these do. In the old days, AutoCAD had the ability to use as many system resources as it wanted on your machines. So if you went to plot a sheet and you had 30 images on this sheet, AutoCAD would try and plot that, and it would be chugging away, right? And it's trying to pull those resources to get that done. And then it got to the point where it realized, I don't have enough system resources here, and boom, your whole machine crashed, right? Everything is down. What these two variables do is they control how much of the system resources AutoCAD is going to be allowed to use. By default, it's set to 20, which is 20%. So now what happens is AutoCAD tries to plot this large file, and it gets to 20% of the system resources and realizes, I don't have enough here. I can't plot this. AutoCAD may crash on you, but your system will not. Your machine will not. So now you're not going to lose your Word document you had open, and anything else you have open that you're working on. That stuff is all going to be saved. So that's what that controls there. So if you're trying to plot images and they just won't print, check these two. The suggestion here is bump it up to maybe 90. You can try maybe 50 first if you're concerned. But usually what happens is if this happens where it doesn't print and you go to these, you're going to be shutting down anything else you have open anyways to free up those extra resources. So it's good because it gives you a warning, and it's better if it's going to crash, it's better only AutoCAD than everything. And those, again, those are in your handout there, those options. Some common questions I want to go over that we see. So we talked about this, right? What's the difference between a CTB and an STB? The CTB, which is your color dependent, this is going to use your object's colors to determine things like line weight in your file. CTBs, how many people use CTBs? Anybody use STBs? Okay. So yeah, that's about what I thought. CTB does tend to be the more common one of the two, excuse me, for whatever reason. But this goes by the object color. There's 256 plot styles that you can choose. For whatever reason, when they came out, CTBs tend to be the one that more people use, so those are going to be the ones that you see most often. They're a little easier to control. There's not as many options in there. So those are the ones that if you have a large team and some of your CAD users maybe aren't very savvy or beginners, CTBs might be the preferred one because they're a little bit easier to keep track of what everybody's doing. The STBs, which are your named plot styles. So the named plot styles are more by object. So you could have objects that are different colors but still plotting out at different weights, where you can't do that with a CTB. They're a little more in-depth. There's a lot more options in there that you can choose with an STB. So again, that's more if you have a lot of power users, then you may want to look into the STBs and see if that's something that will be useful for your office. I also added this blog post in your handouts. It gives a really good description of the both of those with some advantages and disadvantages of each one. So this is on the CAD Manager blog, but this link is in your handouts, but it gives the advantages of STB and CTB, some of the neutral things that could go either way, and then some of the disadvantages of each one. So maybe when you get back, if you're trying to decide which of these you want to use, take a look at this link. It also links to some other good links in there on this one. So if you're trying to decide which one to use, that's a really good link to go and look at. Design Review or TrueView, and this is a little bit outside of plotting, but a lot of folks do use these two programs to plot, especially in the field, so I wanted to talk about this briefly. We get a lot of questions on what should I use, Design Review or TrueView. The first thing to keep in mind is both are free. So I'll get a lot of calls from customers, and they'll tell me, I'm trying to plot with TrueView, but it's not printing out. And I'll say, well, have you tried Design Review? And they won't have that on there. They're both free. They're both very small downloads. They're both small installations. So my recommendation is, first of all, have both of them on your machine. It doesn't hurt anything to have both available. But just to break it down to the basics, Design Review is meant for DWFs, while TrueView is meant for DWGs. So what people don't realize about Design Review is you can open DWGs with Design Review if you have TrueView installed on your machine. What it doesn't tell you is that in the background, it's actually converting that DWG to a DWF. So you don't even realize that because it's all behind the scenes. But people think, well, I can open a DWG with Design Review. What's the difference? But that is the difference, is you're not actually opening the DWG. It's converting it to a DWF. So we talked earlier about not having, if you're going to create a file from a DWG, don't create a PDF from a DWF or a DWFX from that. In essence, that's what you're doing when you open a DWG with Design Review, is you're already setting in motion one conversion of that file. So if you need to use DWGs, and I don't know yet, I have a little more here. If you need to use DWFs rather, use Design Review. That's going to keep it in that default DWF format for you. If you need to open DWGs, use TrueView. It does keep it in that native format. And so it's going to give you those cleaner files. How do I change the margin sizes? I think we're getting close to time, so I'm not going to show this, but we did look at it briefly earlier. So if you go into the PC3 file, right, and then you can choose into Properties, and you can choose those. So the margins, again, are something to keep in mind for a lot of troubleshooting tips if things aren't plotting exactly as they should. And the last one that I'm going over is what is the difference between DWF and DWFX? So simply put, DWFX is going to be the future of these files. So DWF, you can open with Design Review, and DWFX and DWF can both be opened with Design Review. You can only open DWFX with, I'm sorry, let me start over. If you don't have Design Review on your machine, you can open DWFX files just through Windows. If you only have DWF files and not DWFX, then you'll need Design Review installed. So this is handy if you're sending files to somebody maybe in the field and you don't know if they have that installed on their machine. Send them DWFX files. It's all tied into the Microsoft and their XML and their XPS formats, but going forward in time, DWFX files will be the standard because you won't need the Design Review or TrueView on your machine to open those, where with DWF you do. The blog there, again, in time I won't open it, but gives a real good description in a lot more detail of the difference between both those files and what you can do with each one. So I think we have a little bit of time for, well, we have 4 minutes. So does anybody have any questions that I didn't hit on? Again, before we go, I'm happy to, I have some cards up here. I'm happy to take your information if you have any questions going forward when we get back to your offices. Yep, go ahead. And that box isn't checked to create them, or it is checked and you still get other random ones? Okay. So the question was, he's getting plot logs when you don't think you should be getting them, right? Or they're just showing up randomly? I know we've seen, do you remember seeing that, Sylvie? I know that I've seen that as an issue. There are some workarounds. I'm drawing a blank on them right now, but if you want to give me a, what's that? For the plot log? Yes, yeah, in the options dialog box, there's a checkbox. So I'm sorry, I thought you said that was on and you were still, or that was off and you were still getting them. But yeah, if that's off and you're still getting them, then let me know. I can, be in touch with you, but that may just be on. Yep. Yes. Yep.
Because it's just a drawing file name and has no size associated. And I know that when it goes to my kid or whatever my plotter is, it'll go, oh, I'm 8.5 by 11, or oh, I'm a C size, or oh, I'm 11 by 17, and it'll print those.
So you're talking if there's no page setup set?
Yeah, because I know when you do a page setup, you tell it, you import,
Right.
whatever you pick. Well, this is a C size. Well, maybe I've got 3 sizes and I want to do a batch plot of 500 drawings. I don't know what they all are.
Right.
I'm trying to speed that process up because what I'm doing now, I'll print them all, 11 by 17, and sort them, and then make a list.
Yeah, so that's the catch is if you have multiple sizes in there, what we recommend right now is do different plot jobs for each of those. I know I actually met with one of the developers earlier this week, and that is something they're looking at. So I can't comment on when or if it'll make it in there, but currently it's, yeah. Right. And that's where the page setup comes in handy because,
It would be really great if there was a plot to paper space
Yes.
size.
yeah.
Whatever the default is for that. And then if I wanted to change that just for review, if I've got a C size,
Yeah.
I want it to recognize if I've got 500 drawings and I've got 3 different sizes, when I send it, I want it to spit out what I've already
Right.
defaulted that layout tab to. So I think so.
So we're not there yet. We're not there yet. But one thing I can recommend for both, if you go to Autodesk.com and just in the search field put in feedback link, there's a link on there that you can send your comments right directly to our developers. And I know a lot of these links, you know, sometimes the thought is, well, no one's going to look at that, right? But I can tell you they really do look at that and use that feedback. So suggestions like those, they're good ones. I would really recommend use that feedback link.
I would get a huge raise if y'all were doing that. I was making mine.
Yeah, well, I'm okay with that. The other thing, excuse me, the other thing with page setups to keep in mind is it's important to use them because otherwise, not only the page size, but if one file is set, for instance, to print to extent and another one's on layout, you know, that can cause problems with publishing because now you have, you know, if they're using all 5 of those different options that are there, and then the plots are going to come out and they're sort of all over the place. So that's where the page setup comes in handy because then you're sure that they're all set to the same type of layout and size as well.
We do a lot of raster, plot, manipulation, whatnot, and we have to send stuff to the printer, which usually it can't handle large files.
Yeah.
A plotter can. And so that's why I will build a batch plot to my plotter versus my printer and just add all the paper sizes in the rolls.
Yeah.
And spit out.
Let me actually, I have a couple of cards because if you want to send me some of those, I can make sure that it gets to the right group of people. Those are good suggestions, though. So I do have my information up here. I want to thank everyone for coming. Hopefully this was useful to you. Thank you.